So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special virtual presentation with Tennessee Council for History Education. My name is Kira Duke. I work with the Teaching with Primary Sources program at MTSU and am the state coordinator-elect for the Tennessee Council for History Education. We elected to do this year because unfortunately we're not able to do our regular in-person conference back in September, but wanted to have a chance to share some of the content that we had planned for this year, most especially have our keynote speaker, Dr. Carole Bucy, be able to share her presentation. And so that is one reason we wanted to have this event tonight. So before we get started, though, I want to take just a moment to kind of remind you guys of a few things. We are recording this to share later on. So if you would, please keep your mics muted during the presentation, just to help us have a cleaner audio. And if you haven't already, be sure that we are seeing your first and last name in the participant list. And that way, when we're interacting with folks, we are able to, to know who we're talking with. And we do want the session to be interactive, so feel free to make use of the chat box. You can be able to ask questions, and you can, of course, use the reaction buttons as well. During the course of Dr. Bucy's presentation, feel free to drop any questions in the chat box. We will have time for Q&A after her talk, and we'll be pulling some questions from the chat box there. We are also able this evening to present our Gilder Lehrman Teacher of the Year Award, and we're really excited to have with us Jamie Marcus, who is the Senior Program Manager for Gilder Lehrman. And so at this point in time, I'm going to turn things over to her.
Good evening, everyone. As Kira said, my name is Jamie Marcus, and I am the History Teacher of the Year Program Manager at the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, and I'm so pleased to be joining all of you tonight. Each year, the History Teacher of the Year Award honors an exceptional K-12 teacher in each of the 50 states, District of Columbia, Department of Defense schools, and U.S. territories. Our president, Jim Basker, always likes to say teachers are the lifeblood of our students' education, and these are the best of the best. So I'm very excited to join you tonight to honor 3 of these exceptional teachers. Duke Ritchie is the 2021 Tennessee History Teacher of the Year. Brittney Taylor is the 2020 Tennessee History Teacher of the Year, and Dustin Brannon is the 2019 History Teacher of the Year. In order to achieve this award, each of these winners first had to be recognized for their outstanding work in the classroom by being nominated by a peer, and then were asked to submit an application that included sample teaching materials. These applications and teaching materials were reviewed by a state committee, and each of these winners were selected as the best history teacher in the state of Tennessee in their respective years. Their commitment to excellence in the classroom and their leadership in the field exemplifies what it means to be a Gilder Lehrman History Teacher of the Year, and we are so proud to honor each of you. Congratulations. We're surrounded tonight by more exceptional teachers, and we encourage you to nominate them for the 2022 award. Nominations are open year-round and can be made by visiting gilderlehrman.org/nominate, and I'll put the link in the chat. And to keep the program running, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa Oakley, who is the Tennessee History Teacher of the Year Coordinator, to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much, Jamie, and we really appreciate all that Gilder Lehrman does on behalf of history education, and we're really excited about the partnership with Tennessee Council for History Education for a number of years. We've been able to provide the announcement and kind of the celebration of the Teacher of the Year at the conference, and we all know that over the past few years that's been a challenge. So we're kind of catching up, and we're excited to announce a new winner for next year. So as Jamie said, just be aware that those announcements will come for nominations. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me. And I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And you will see on the screen, it has my contact information as well. And as this recording will be available later, you can go back and visit to find that contact. Or reach out to Kira and she can get you in touch with me or with Jamie for that matter. So we're just really tickled to be able to do this this evening and to be able to honor these 3 teachers. So I'll begin with honoring Dr. Duke Ritchie, who is with us this evening. Congratulations to Dr. Ritchie. He's with the Macaulay School of Chattanooga for being selected the Tennessee History Teacher of the Year for 2021. Dr. Ritchie also advanced with 9 other state level winners to the final round of consideration for the Gilder Lehrman National Teacher of the Year. Dr. Ritchie's main goal as a social studies educator is for his students to understand that history is intensely personal and that we all have tangible links to the past, whether producing nationally competitive National History Day projects, conducting oral interviews with local veterans, or going on the road to research in collections, visit museums and historic sites, or just steep themselves in the place and time studied. Dr. Ritchie's students explore the intended and unintended consequences found in the study of history. It is his integration of discovery and inquiry into the classroom, as well as Dr. Ritchie's high expectations and community service as a historian himself, that stood out when being considered for the 2021 Gilder Lehrman Teacher of the Year for Tennessee. Dr. Ritchie is with us tonight and wondered if you wanted to say a few words.
I was muted. Yeah, thank you. I'll just very quickly give a plug. I mean, I'm very honored, but Gilder Lehrman, I've known about Gilder Lehrman for years. I've used their resources. You should check these things out that are on their webpage that are useful in the classroom. And also, I did one of the greatest professional development things I've ever done was a few summers ago. I got the chance to do one of their teacher summer seminars with Barbara Perry from the University of Virginia, who's a presidential historian. I got to do a course on the Kennedy presidency, which was in Boston and based out of Boston University. And it was an incredible experience. I'm just thankful that there's an organization like this that works with teachers and then honors teachers. And I'm incredibly honored to have been nominated in the first place by my department chair, and then to have put together the materials and had it, get the recognition. It's great, but I also know that there are literally hundreds of other teachers in Tennessee who, if they just get nominated and put together the materials, are worthy to win this. And then one other thing I'll just say, this is a shameless plug, but one of the things, I just put it in the chat, and it's worth checking out. I think particularly if you teach older students, but I started this project here a few years ago where I have my students interview people about where they were on 9/11. And we've been doing it for about 8 years. And then we launched a website this year on the 20th anniversary of oral histories and stories of people, some of whom were in New York, some of whom were here in Tennessee and elsewhere. So check it out. I put the link in the chat. So thank you.
And thank you. And I think that's one of the things we always enjoy in working with teachers and programs like this, or, hopefully more and more in-person programs, is sharing ideas and their experiences and resources. And the fact that Gilder Lehrman can recognize teachers that do this so well in their states. But let me say that all the nominees and those that applied were incredible teachers, and we should all be very proud of the teachers we have in our state. So congratulations again. And now we'll move on to our Gilder Lehrman Tennessee History Teacher of the Year for 2020. Congratulations to Brittney Taylor, who teaches 8th grade at Rockvale Middle School in Rutherford County. And let me see if I can get my thing to advance. Now it doesn't want to advance. I'll go down here. There we go. Ms. Taylor recognizes that the evolution of technology in the social studies classroom opens the door to active inquiry, ease of differentiated instruction, and peer collaboration. By utilizing technology, especially through access to digital primary sources, she has witnessed a vast improvement in student engagement, problem solving, and academic exploration. Ms. Taylor encourages student curiosity, feeds their desire to investigate and make connections, as well as facilitates the evaluation of choice making in the past and how these lessons can relate to the world today. Complacency is the enemy of progress, she states. Therefore, Ms. Taylor finds it critical to continue to seek and find innovative methods of instruction through collaboration, research, and internal reflection in order to keep pace with constantly shifting classroom expectations. Ms. Taylor did register for this evening, but last time I checked, Kira, I don't think she's been able to join us yet. So maybe at the end, if she is able to join us, we can ask her if she'd like to say a few words before we end the evening, but we certainly send our congratulations to Brittney for her award and her patience in the presentation. Okay, and so congratulations now go to Dustin Brannon. He's 8th grade teacher at Rocky Fort Middle School, also in Rutherford County, and he's the 2019 Gilder Lehrman Tennessee History Teacher of the Year. Through his students' experience in the classroom or in his after-school history club, Mr. Brannon hopes to influence the next generation. He wants his students to know how they can take an active role within their community and make changes they wish to see in our society. In order to achieve his goal, he seeks out professional development opportunities, researches methods, and identifies engaging and relative resources, including visiting historical sites and museums to gain impersonal knowledge and capture the experience for his students. The interactive, technology-rich lessons he creates allow students to uncover the past that has contributed to where they are today. Mr. Brannon's teaching philosophy can be summarized by his statement, "I want to make stuff come to life, so whenever I'm making lesson plans, I'm trying to put myself in the seat of an 8th grader. What would make it more interesting?" Mr. Brannon isn't able to join us tonight, but if he were, I would share with him that as the selection committee considered the nominations this past year, we realized that each of the nominees would agree with Mr. Brannon's goal of bringing history to life and making it more interesting. Our 3 winners recognized tonight have accomplished this and more. Again, please watch for more information. And I just want to say that, again, when we were sitting as a committee, looking at the nominees, it was amazing how many, and in fact, most talked about the relation of making their students aware or helping them connect the past to being a good citizen today and being engaged in the world today in an active way and in a knowledgeable way. And thinking critically about the world today. And so that was really encouraging, and I really thank them for that. So that concludes our presentation for the evening. Thank you, and I now turn the program over to Todd Wigington. He's past and actually the original state coordinator for Tennessee Council for History Education, and is currently, as it's being passed to Kira. So they've worked on this event together and worked this year together and in kind of growing Tennessee Council for History Education. And I'm going to turn it over to Todd and let him take the program from there. Thank you all.
Thanks, Lisa. And it really is nice and inspirational and encouraging, as you said, to hear about the wonderful things that are going on in our classrooms across the state with not just these 3 that we're honoring tonight, but I know it's been a tough couple of years in the classroom, and the dedication of the teachers is just inspirational and amazing. So thank you all for doing that. And tonight it's my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote speaker. I approached Dr. Bucy over a year ago, I think, about speaking at a live event, which we had to postpone because of COVID. And it was timely in that it was the celebration of the women's suffrage movement, and we were excited to have her for that. But we didn't get to have that event, but we're equally excited to let her share her expertise with us at this point in time in this venue. So I do want to say a few words before I go over her bio with you. I've known Carole for about 20 years, and it's you'll see that her cheerful smile and combined with her content knowledge just makes her such a great person to share a narrative of history with you. And so we are looking forward to hearing from her tonight on that. And also, I do remember there was a number of years that we went to some national conferences together, and Carole seemed to win the door prize every year. So she's got good fortune as well. So we're really excited about having her here. So Dr. Bucy is a professor of history at the Volunteer State Community College and holds an honorary position of Davidson County historian. I'm going to argue a little bit that it's as much work as it is honorary, because I know she's done some projects that over the years that I've been aware of. So there's work involved with that as well. She has degrees in history from Baylor University, George Peabody College, and Vanderbilt University. She's done extensive research, writing, and speaking about Tennessee women's history. particularly the history of women in politics. As a lifelong advocate for local and state history, she's also directed 2 Teaching American History grants from 2003 to 2006, as well as 2006 to 2009. And she just continues to conduct teacher workshops on the incorporation of Tennessee history into existing U.S. history courses. She is frequently a speaker across the state on a variety of historical subjects. She's the author of the textbooks that we use in Metro Nashville right now for 4th and 5th grade students, as well as other districts across the state. She has written a number of scholarly articles about Tennessee women, and most recently, Dr. Bucy has been a researcher for the Nashville Public Library's Votes on Women's Room, commemorating the 100th anniversary of Tennessee ratification of the 19th Amendment, as well as a consultant for Ratified, the Tennessee State Museum's women's suffrage exhibit. She was also featured on By One Vote, which was a Nashville Public Television's documentary about the Tennessee's ratification of the 19th Amendment. And the documentary premiered at the Tennessee State Museum with nationwide and was distributed to public televisions across the country. More recently, she appeared on WNPT's newest documentary, The Fight to Vote, Black Voter Suppression in Tennessee, and is now serving as the humanities scholar for East Tennessee Historical Society's Suffrage Showdown virtual exhibit of Tennessee's pivotal role in votes for women. And the University of Tennessee's History and Geography department's The Suffrage Movement in Children's Literature, a traveling literature kit for Tennessee teachers. And we are just pleased and delighted to have Carole as our keynote tonight. And without further ado, Carole, I'm going to give you the mic and the stage and the camera and all that. So we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. I think I need to give you my share screen, don't I? I'm going to have to get back into Zoom here and go to share screen, and then I'll have my PowerPoint up. I'm delighted to be with all of you tonight. It doesn't take much to get me geared up to talk to teachers. I think that you all are the front line of our future, and every American, I think, has no real understanding of what teachers do if they have themselves not been in the trenches as you have been, particularly these past 2 years with everything so uncertain and teaching on a day-to-day basis and who's going to be here and who's not going to be here. So tonight, I'm going to talk about something different that I doubt that very many of you have heard me talk about before. And this is really what happened in Tennessee, as well as the United States, after women got the right to vote, after the Tennessee legislature ratified the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. Now, let me tell you, on August 18th, 1920, there was no celebration in Nashville. Church bells may have been ringing all over the country, but they were not ringing in Nashville, Tennessee in 1920 because the antis had put up so much fierce resistance. And immediately they were talking about getting the ratification vote undone. They had a huge rally at the Ryman Auditorium. They tried to get a court injunction. When that didn't work, they tried to get the signing of the documents by the Secretary of State of the United States undone. They did everything in their power. And so the suffragists were really quite nervous and exhausted from this intense fight. Nobody had ever expected the fight to be that angrily carried out even after the final vote had taken place. But last year, even though our plans were dramatically changed on August the 18th, it was still very exciting, at least for me. I live in Nashville, about 2 miles from Centennial Park, and that is where the suffrage monument is in Centennial Park, because there were so many suffrage marches from the state capitol down the hill towards Centennial Park, with a rally at the park and speakers and other things at the Centennial Park. So on August the 18th, 2020, a lot of the plans had been canceled, but there was going to be an event at the marker And so it was very limited only to the people speaking that day. But there were people outside of fence, and I was really fortunate enough to be asked to speak in this because I really went over there feeling, oh, this is just not going to be anything like we had hoped for. But then there's a little silence there as we're kind of waiting for things to start. And there is an airplane, a small airplane that starts circling very high and then spiraling down. And then one at a time, these women parachute artists jumped out of this plane. There were 6 of them in all, and I felt every hair on my body rising up. I felt chill bumps. It was such a thing. It was like watching ballet. They came down so gracefully. As you see here, they have this Votes for Women flag attached. They had different things, yellow parachutes, and they come down. It was the most graceful thing I've ever seen. And they were so proficient at parachuting that they walked it off. They didn't fall to the ground and have to pick themselves up. They just walked it off, took their gear off, and then came over to the tent for the rest of the festivities that day. But it really was a very moving occasion for me, and I did not expect to be moved that day in this fashion at all. Church bells in Nashville, city bells were ringing all over the city. Children were out on the streets wherever they lived that day, ringing bells. West End Avenue in Nashville was filled with people out on the sidewalk with bells, and the church bells ringing 100 times to celebrate. And there were a lot of things going on. The State Museum had a little bit of a program, and then the big finale was at the Hermitage Hotel. And again, there weren't very many people there, but it was a really exciting thing to think of how far we had come since 1920. And as far as this story goes, when I came here in 1971 to graduate school, as a history major, I did not hear one thing about Tennessee ratifying the 19th Amendment. I certainly hadn't learned anything about it out in Texas. History was pretty much politics, which was pretty much totally men, and military history. And so there were very few women in the history books. And it wasn't until about 1992 or 3 that I saw this performer named Candace Anderson Corrigan, who had this radio drama called The Perfect 36. And I was mesmerized by the story of this. I heard this radio documentary that she had done, very clever music. She's performed it several times across the state in years since. And I was really struck by the story. And that is what began my fascination with this story of how women got the right to vote. Today, the story is well known. When we celebrated the 75th anniversary 25 years ago, it was not very well known. But now I think, thanks to all of the enthusiasm from all parts of the state, and indeed almost every single county in the state, for this story of Tennessee's dramatic role in the ratification, everybody knows the story. They know what happened down at the Capitol. They know that the Senate had passed the amendment, and yet in the House, it seemed that it was going to fail until Harry Byrne got that letter from his mother. Now, that's the short version of the story. There are lots of other pieces to this story, but all of you know this story, and it is in part of the social studies standards. It is taught very, very regularly to children and high school students as well in the school. Here is Governor Roberts signing the amendment. It then goes to Washington, and yet those antis were determined. Even after Secretary of State Colby signed the documents proclaiming it now part of the Constitution, the antis continued throughout September to try to get this undone. They were determined. And I think this really colored what happened to the front line of the suffragists later. Anne Dallas Dudley's daughter, who was in college at Bryn Mawr, was getting ready to come home in 1923. She was getting ready to go to the train station. She stepped out into the street and was hit by a truck and was killed. Catherine Kinney's husband had to declare bankruptcy. Lizzie Crozier French, the intrepid Knoxville woman leader, female leader there, died, as I really think she wanted to die, doing some work at the National Woman's Party's headquarters in Washington, D.C. Abby Milton from Chattanooga had a tremendous amount of exhaustion, and we don't hear anything from her after she finishes her term as the president of the League of Women Voters. And so you see this group that had come together to get ratification gradually unwinding and coming apart. It was the beginning of something, but it was going to take far more than the suffragists had expected to take place, because the antis were still up for a court fight, and it had been very unpleasant, the attacks that had been made. And so here comes the November 1920 election. And again, the suffragists were devastated that so many women just didn't seem to care. They didn't bother to go out and get registered to vote, or when they did get registered to vote, they voted just exactly like their husband or father voted. There wasn't this independent woman's vote materializing. And Governor Roberts, who had supported the suffrage amendment and called the special session, he was defeated by the Republican candidate, governor, who became Governor Taylor. Alfred Taylor became the governor, succeeding Governor Roberts. So overall, you see this great decline. The momentum that the suffrage movement had getting to August did not push them forward into the 1920s. We did have one woman joining the Tennessee General Assembly as a senator. Ann Lee Worley took her husband's seat when he died rather suddenly in East Tennessee. She represented Kingsport and that area of the state in the state Senate, but she only ran for one election and did not run again. So you don't really see any women in Tennessee politics. You do see Marion Griffin from Memphis, who was a lawyer. She has a really interesting story in that she passed the bar. Well, she passed the qualifications for becoming a lawyer, and they would not give her her license. And so she ended up going after that up to the University of Michigan and getting a bachelor's degree in law. She had read the law with a judge in Memphis, and finally became a lawyer and got elected to the House of Representatives. Now, she worked for the rest of her life on women's issues, but she only served one term in the General Assembly. Her law practice, when it was established in Memphis, really was geared towards helping women and children. And what about this organization that had succeeded the Suffrage Association? The League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters had an ambitious agenda. It was very women's oriented. It was focused on women and children. And they had a great deal of study in these topics that they were supporting related to education, child welfare, other issues related to women. And they got some of these before Congress. What they couldn't really do is turn out a woman's vote. Their numbers dwindled very rapidly in the 1920s. One of the most successful things that they did get passed was a maternal and infancy hygiene bill known as the Shepard-Towner Act for the two members of Congress who sponsored this bill. And basically it was health practices and to some degree home nursing visits for women who were pregnant, women with small children. It was teaching them how to prevent illnesses, how to treat illnesses. It was really one of the very, very first efforts of the federal government to try to provide some kind of health care support for people in need. So this was a major success for the League of Women Voters, but it was one of those cost-sharing bills. So the state legislature had to put up 50% of the money in order for that money to come to Tennessee. Now, the Tennessee legislature did support the Shepard-Towner Act, and they did have a across the state movement of providing these services for women in need and children in need. You know, today we can't imagine that one of the big issues for small children was a lack of milk. And that is because in the summer, people who did not have the old-fashioned ice box where the iceman came once or twice a week and put ice in one side to keep your milk safe in the other side. If you didn't have that and you didn't have a cow, your children might not have milk. And so this Shepard-Towner Act did a great deal of good in trying to see that women had the right kind of food and milk for their children as they grew up. But there was a great divide from the beginning, from the suffrage movement. You had seen Carrie Chapman Catt's group, the National Woman Suffrage Association, NASA, seeing Alice Paul's more activist type women, the younger women in the suffrage movement, breaking away from NASA and forming the National Woman's Party. And this took place before suffrage. Alice Paul's group were much more eager to be physically and present and active. And so when Carrie Chapman Catt's group decided to stop campaigning for suffrage when the United States entered World War I, Alice Paul's group had said, no, this is the time to strike. Here is our president, Woodrow Wilson. He's got a strong-willed wife and 3 daughters. He needs to endorse woman suffrage. And when Woodrow Wilson didn't, they picketed the White House, were arrested, and many of the sort of mainline suffragists, particularly here in Tennessee, and Dallas Dudley, was horrified at the actions of these women in the Women's Party, even though there were a lot of women in the Women's Party in East Tennessee, and Sue Shelton White is the name that we recognize here in Tennessee as being one of the activists in Alice Paul's Women's Party in Washington, D.C. All right, suffrage is passed. Now what? Well, the League of Women Voters, the successor to the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NASA, says we need to work to get Congress to pass legislation to protect women. Now, what would that be? That would be maximum hour laws. That would be issues related to child support. It would be related to working conditions. But Alice Paul's group said, no, we need complete equality. And as a result of this debate here, what do women need? Protective legislation or complete equality? You see these two groups going in different directions. And in 1923, Alice Paul and the Woman's Party introduced the Equal Rights Amendment. It was introduced in Congress, and it sort of suffered what Susan B. Anthony's original suffrage amendment suffered. It was looked at and politely tabled. She rewrote the amendment 3 times before it was actually voted on. And basically, this is the female equivalent of the 14th Amendment. You will recall that the 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The 14th Amendment gave African-American men, that's the first time that gender was mentioned in the Constitution, African-American men full equality under the law. And then it gave, with the 15th Amendment, African-American men the right to vote. And so the Equal Rights Amendment was really amending to some degree the 14th Amendment, adding women in to having complete equality under the law. But this was considered a radical idea. And then the Depression comes along. Here in Tennessee, the League of Women Voters really goes pretty much dormant for a few years during the height of the Depression. And you see First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and Secretary of Labor here working together on women's issues, but they are in Washington and not in Tennessee. So it is not until the Tennessee Valley Authority executives began coming into Tennessee to set up the TVA that we see their spouses coming in, and most of them had come from Washington, and the women had been very active in the League of Women Voters there. And so they rejuvenated the League of Women Voters at that point. And then when the scientists come in during World War II and start the Oak Ridge Laboratory, then you see another group of women coming in and doing that. But you have Frances Perkins here, the Secretary of Labor, and she is doing what she can to support the agenda of the League of Women Voters. Eleanor Roosevelt supported that agenda as well. Now, the war indirectly really contributed to the Equal Rights Amendment getting passed. When the U.S. entered World War II, it was all hands on deck. In Tennessee, women became Rosie the Riveters. Here you see two women working in the Vultee aircraft plant. Women were working in all manner of munitions industries across the state of Tennessee. And when the war ended, many of these women had discovered that they actually kind of liked working. They enjoyed making their own money. They enjoyed having their children cared for. They felt that their child care situation was pretty good. And so yet, when the war ended, these women were expected to go back home. Now, keep in mind, we end the war with Germany and Japan, and then we enter this period of the Cold War with the United States in a intellectual war, I suppose, is part of it, with communism. And those of us who are old enough to remember the height of the Cold War, we were terrified of the communists. Growing up in the 50s, the communists were something to be terribly afraid of. And so the personification of the Soviet Union that was presented to American women was a sort of Brunhilde, large, very large woman wearing army boots, women wearing army boots. And so, you know, do you want your women to be like this, working in a factory all the time? Or would you like for your women to be like this? Beaver's mom, June Cleaver, always wearing her pearls and high heel shoes when she cooks breakfast for the Beaver and his brother Wally. That was the personification of what an American non-Cold War woman should look like. She should be like June Cleaver. Vice President Richard Nixon went to Russia, went to the Soviet Union. He took with him an American exhibit of the life of a housewife, a happy housewife. And here you see Nikita Khrushchev, who was the premier of the Soviet Union, as Vice President Nixon is explaining all of these modern conveniences that American women have, that they don't have to go work in a factory. And look at the products that are on the counter there now, SOS, various kinds of detergent, all of these things. And you can imagine that those cabinets, for those of you who have any recollection of what this period of time was like, they're probably full of Jell-O. Jell-O was a very popular thing in the 1950s to be served. Jell-O and cake mix, all of these mixes came out. And so this became very popular. All right. Now, John F. Kennedy is elected president in 1960. And he did get a significant amount of the women's vote. So when he is elected and takes office, he creates the National Commission on the Status of Women. And the chair of this committee is none other than Eleanor Roosevelt itself. And so they will work, the committee members will work discussing what women need, what status women in the United States should have. And President Kennedy starts the wheels rolling for this to be accepted, and some of the laws changed. Now, in the meantime, before President Kennedy was assassinated, Betty Friedan, who was a journalist, published a book called The Feminine Mystique. And this book was one of those books that really, really created a new sense of awareness of the status of women. The book, The Feminine Mystique, is based on her trip to a college reunion at Smith College, a women's college, where she had seen all of her classmates, none of which really were working. They were housewives. And she describes their condition as an illness that has no name. It is the feminist mystique. They don't have any purpose in life other than caring for their children, making their husband happy, and women need to be more fully utilized. So this book comes out and it is reprinted, and it really gets women to thinking about what their status really is. Now, I've got to tell you something about Betty Friedan that I find pretty interesting. She was, for a period of time, a member of the League of Women Voters. Also, at this same time in the 50s, 1950s, and the League of Women Voters in the 1950s is really in its golden age. They have really, after World War II, grown exponentially, and the League of Women Voters is really active all over the country, but all over Tennessee. Not only was the League's nonpartisan umbrella big enough for Betty Friedan to be under it and part of the League for a brief period of time. Also, for a brief period of time, Phyllis Schlafly was a member of the League of Women Voters, and that is where she learned many of her grassroots techniques that she will later apply when she starts the Eagle Forum. And so here women have this malaise. What their mental condition is. These women are just bored to tears is pretty much what Betty Friedan is saying. So one of the things that comes out of this commission is that women should be paid equal pay for equal work. And you know, for those of you who are teachers, male and female, it is hard to imagine that teachers were not necessarily, women teachers were not necessarily paid what men teachers were paid all across the country. And certainly in Tennessee, African-American teachers with the same kind of college education were not paid the same amount as white teachers were paid until the Brown decision came along. So here you've got this Equal Pay Act, and women are excited about this, and it looks like a step forward. So here you see Bella Abzug and a group of younger feminists, and they say the time is now. National Organization of Women. You see Betty Friedan, here is Betty Friedan right here. Here is Bella Abzug in the hat. And this may be Gloria Steinem, but I'm not sure. But nonetheless, the time is now for the Equal Rights Amendment. And so they formed this organization now specifically to get the Equal Rights Amendment passed to the Constitution. And they have a remarkable amount of energy and enthusiasm moving forward. Interestingly enough, by 1960, many of the national women's organizations, the business and professional women's clubs, the General Federation of Women, the YWCA, the Girl Scouts had endorsed the Equal Rights Amendment, one of the very last groups to endorse the Equal Rights Amendment, which didn't really endorse it until right at the time it was ratified, it was passed by Congress, was the League of Women Voters. So then here comes Lyndon Johnson's presidency, and he will get the Civil Rights Act passed, followed by the Voting Rights Act, and then he will also get the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission started, which will benefit women as well. And this is what brings in, among other things, affirmative action. So the National Organization of Women starts really the campaign for the Equal Rights Amendment. And there you see a Catholic sister among the women who were very active in this group. Equal quality for all women. Pass the ERA at Congress and let's get it passed and added to the Constitution. So they work really, really hard, and the timing for this seems to be right. There's a lot of demonstrations. One takes place at the Miss America pageant. There's a lot of legends about what the protest and what was being burned in that trash can was, but these women were protesting the Miss America pageant as being too sexist and women having to have their identity based on how they look. And so here, this is what the pickets that the feminists were marching in front of the Miss America pageant in Atlantic City. Women feeling older, watch your man, watch Miss America. So Congress passes it March 22nd, 1972. The documents are signed by President Richard Nixon. He has a wife and 2 daughters himself. It is signed and sent out to the states for ratification. And in Tennessee, there was a tremendous amount of support for this in March of 1972. We've got lots of women working hard in Tennessee, and you see not only have they founded now to get this passed, but they've also founded the National Women's Political Caucus to get women elected to public office. And Gloria Steinem has founded the Ms. Magazine. Here's one of my favorite Ms. Magazine covers, the American woman as Superwoman here. So the Tennessee legislature passed a resolution to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment in 1972. I think this is, a month after it had come out of Congress, and I think that that the people in Tennessee this was about the 9th state to ratify it. We weren't the first, but we were about the 9th state. But the leaders of the National Organization of Women really felt like they had the votes in 1972 and that ratification was going to be a done deal within a year or 2. And we have this Title IX being added to an Education Act, and all of us in Tennessee recognize this woman who really did a tremendous amount for women's rights in Tennessee, Pat Head Summitt, who should be long remembered in Tennessee history for what she did for equality in sports. There's a nice little book about a girl in Oak Ridge going to court to to allow girls to play full court basketball in the Tennessee high schools. And Pat Summitt was called in to testify that yes, the girls should be playing full court basketball in high school. It's a charming little book. It's very interesting to read. And then here comes Roe versus Wade. All of this momentum, and the Supreme Court handed down this decision. Now, the Equal Rights Amendment does not say anything about abortion. Women shall be treated equally under the law. Here is Phyllis Schlafly. She has a law degree from Washington University. She is a devout Catholic. She is the mother of several children. And she is really a very active supporter of anti-communist programs. She and her husband had been members of the John Birch Society. She was more of a communist fighter until the Equal Rights Amendment came along. And in the beginning, she didn't really seem to have much interest in it, but the more she thought about it, she saw this as an opportunity. And I have to give Phyllis Schlafly a lot of credit in terms of being an effective grassroots organizer. I personally don't think the country has ever had a more effective grassroots organizer than Phyllis Schlafly. She had a newsletter that she sent out for free. Her husband was a prosperous lawyer, and she sent out this newsletter, and she openly said, take any of my information and use it. And so she starts this anti-ERA campaign. She was an excellent communicator, and her communication was make it simple, things that people can understand. So what will the Equal Rights Amendment, women being treated equally under the law, mean? And she convinced people very well of this. It means abortion on demand. Keep in mind, we are right still in Vietnam. We're about to get out, but we have lived through Vietnam and all those body bags being removed from airplanes out in California. And so she says it will bring abortions on demand, women in the military. And this actually sounds to some degree kind of silly, but it was a big deal in 1972 or 3. Unisex bathrooms, restrooms. And those 3 things made her Eagle Forum grow unbelievably as a grassroots organization. It had a very large following in Tennessee, and for many, many years, there were lobbyists down at the legislature. Even after the Equal Rights Amendment failed, there were still Eagle Forum lobbyists at the legislature. It's going to destroy the American family. Women are going to be putting their children in state-run daycare centers. We're going to be just like those communists. And so she really went after Jimmy Carter in her Stop ERA campaign. And then about the same time, here comes this book, which is a bestseller, Maribel Morgan's The Total Woman. And it's how to be a proper wife and how to, I have read the book. Actually, I was given a copy when I got married in 1974, to tell you the truth. It is pretty unbelievable what is in this book, but it's basically teaching women how to manipulate their husband without him knowing he's being manipulated. And you have to act weak and submission. Oh, darling, I just can't pick up that heavy trash bag and carry it out to the garbage can. Could you lift that heavy trash can and take it to the garbage can for me? And it's really unbelievable, but women really gravitated to this. A lot of women bought this book. It was a bestseller, and she has all manner of interesting things in this book. She had conferences, she had all manner of things going on, and she profited financially from this. Okay, January 8th, the General Assembly of Tennessee is coming back into session. Our Speaker of the House is none other than Ned Ray McWhirter. And so the Equal Rights Amendment had passed by a huge vote in 1972. The House had passed it by a vote of 72 for it to 0 against it. Now, of course, you know that there are 95 members of the Tennessee House, so some people were absent that day in order to avoid voting, but it passed by 72 to 0 in the House and 25 to 5 in the Senate. So now you have a group of women on the first day coming before the General Assembly and wanting to get their attention to undo their vote of 2 years ago on the ratification of the ERA. And this whole project that is getting ready to unfold the first day, the first hitting of the gavel of Ned McWhirter to call the session into order. It is led by former Miss America, Barbara Jo Walker Hummel of Memphis. She is leading an anti-ERA force, and she has this all planned out. So immediately, Speaker McWhirter says, I'm going to call a brief recess so that a group of lovely ladies can speak to us. And so this is what unfolds this skit that is called Ruth Vanwinkle. And basically what is in this, you see all of these women dressed in costumes coming out and performing a little talk before the legislature. So the first one that comes out is a woman who's in the Army. She's a soldier, and Ruth Vanwinkle has been asleep for 20 years, and she's awakened, and these women are now appearing before her. In other words, the United States in 1994. You're going to have women soldiers, and they're going to be in combat in the Army. And the Equal Rights Amendment is the cause of all of this. Then you see a woman coming out with a big garbage can because she's a garbage worker, and her children are in a federal daycare center. We don't have time for housework taking care of our children. We've been liberated. Thank you, ERA. Then comes a carpenter, a woman as a football player, a woman as a judge who spends so much of her time handling divorce cases that she can't get any sleep because of the ERA has caused a rise in divorce cases. And so finally, the announcer, who is Barbara Hummel herself, says, Ruth, wake up, this is just a bad dream. It hasn't taken place. And then you hear music being played in the House chamber. I enjoy being a girl. It is heard as the skit closes. And so Barbara Hummel speaks to the members of the General Assembly, and she says, we want to ask you to rescind your vote on the Equal Rights Amendment. And then she says, she's got some women with baskets and you see one of these women here in this picture with baskets. They are filled with delicious things that these women have baked. It is cookies for the bread bakers to the bread makers, meaning the men making the money here. And so this was not the only thing that made the General Assembly change its mind. Politics in Tennessee was beginning to change. Even though Tennessee had a Republican governor, Winfield Dunn, who he and his wife, Betty, very much supported the Equal Rights Amendment. And so from this point forward, the Equal Rights Amendment is pretty well dead. It is not going to pass. There is a huge, enormous blow up in Houston later on with a national women's conference taking place during the Carter administration, and Phyllis Schlafly outdoing this National Women's Conference because she felt the delegates were too much in favor of the ERA, and she had her own alternate conference. Instead of in an auditorium, she was able to fill up the Astrodome. And so that is what happened in Tennessee. And I will say this, I think that women lost the battle of the ERA, at least for the moment. And yet women, you do see really finding their way into politics. We had had a few women elected to the General Assembly. We had had a few women elected here and there. Jane Eskin was the first woman to win a statewide election when she was elected to the old Public Service Commission. We have women running for governor. We have women running for United States Senate. And, you know, today there are more women than ever at the Tennessee General Assembly, at most of the governing bodies in most of the towns and counties of Tennessee. Women are represented in those bodies. We had our first female Speaker of the House with Beth Harwell. We now have we've had U.S. congressmen who have been women, but we now have our first woman senator, I'm tired. I'm having a mental blank here about our female senator, Marsha Blackburn. Now it's coming to me. Excuse me, Marsha Blackburn. I apologize for that, but we have our first female senator. So women are in politics, and women are getting protective legislation. They are now having equality in the workplace. There are some things that women still feel they need, but the Equal Rights Amendment comes up every now and then. But whether the ratification could take place now seems to be an issue that would have to be decided by the United States Supreme Court. And so with that, I'm going to stop my sharing screen and take some questions or comments from you. And I'm happy for you all to send me any emails if you have any questions about this, but we'll hear from whoever's monitoring the chat and the questions, and I'll be happy to answer some questions and see if I can sort some things out if you have any.
So you
Carole,
prefer that, you prefer
Carole,
that to happen in the chat, right? Okay. So.
Yeah,
I think
so
Kira's going to ask. Kira's going to ask the questions. Yes, you put your question in the chat, Duke, and then I will try to answer it.
So yeah, so while you guys are adding your questions into the chat, I want to kick things off with one question. Carole, you mentioned that the League of Women Voters was not in support of the ERA, early on. Why did it take them so long to get to the point that they changed their mind and began to support it?
I'm not really sure. I think the League really felt that women needed protection. And, it's two very different demographics of women. The League women, by and large, were not career women. The women who supported the Women's Party and the Equal Rights Amendment were working women. And I think that the women who were on the League board were especially at all levels, but the membership, because they had daytime meetings and they took positions on political issues. They did a lot of research, but the Women's Party wanted more action and less research. So I think that it was the demographics. I was privileged enough several years ago now to work on a paper I was writing in the National League office, and they had biographies in folders in their files of every woman who had been on the national board. And they were elite, highly educated, mostly, but not exclusively white. They were educated. They were pretty sophisticated and financially secure. And the majority of these women, one of the things they had to check off on this little form was how much domestic help do you have? And these women, I mean, they were checking off domestic help. So they were elite women. And, you know, the League was proud of its record on civil rights, but they were very reluctant to give up that platform of women needs, and what women needed was protection.
Thank you. So Duke's question. So you mentioned that the ERA was rescinded in 1974. What was the vote in the legislature? And also how many states by that point had passed it versus how many states had rescinded?
Okay, I think I actually have some statistical information here for you, but it was that when the legislature rescinded the vote, let me tell you what the vote was. I'll see if I can find it here in my notes. But it was by a very large margin in the House and a less large margin in the Senate. But in the Senate, the vote was 18-11. And that was a big change when it voted to rescind it by that vote. And a week later, the House rescinded it by a vote of 56-33. So people changed their mind. Members of our legislature changed their mind.
So out of curiosity, was that done along party lines or was it a mix?
I think it was a mix. I think it definitely was a mix. And see, you know, we hadn't gotten so much into this red state, blue state business. Even though Winfield Dunn was a Republican governor, he and Betty Dunn supported it. He absolutely supported the Equal Rights Amendment, and he supported what followed out of the Carter administration, which was state committees on the status of women. He supported all of that and made the appointments to it. But, you know, I went through his papers, several years ago now, and it was fascinating when this Stop ERA campaign started. The letters from, you could tell it was almost from one group because they were all from Montgomery County, the Clarksville area. And they were all handwritten, but they were all from women. And it was basically the same letter written in different handwriting and signed by different women, but was asking Governor Dunn to come out and oppose the Equal Rights Amendment.
So another question, kind of building off that, what made Dunn change his mind?
Dunn never changed his mind. He always supported it. Dunn did not change his mind in spite of that folder full of letters. He supported it, but he did not. I think Winfield Dunn himself did not realize how politically, what a politically hot potato the subject became. When Phyllis Schlafly is able to say voting for this is abortion on demand, women in the military, and unisex bathrooms, and then, you know, all these children are going to be held captive in some federal daycare center out there. I think that those things really resonated with a lot of people. And as I said, she was masterful at organizing people, and she was very feminine and very, always would, when she got up to speak, she would say, "I want to thank my husband for giving me permission to speak tonight." And she was very much portraying what she saw as the antithesis of Bella Abzug, Betty Friedan, and even Gloria Steinem. So she was trying to present herself as a woman's woman. Other questions?
Well, the other part of my question was, did other states rescind?
Yes.
I mean, did this thing get close to passing and then the other states rescinded? Or
I think that it finally got up to 34. And then several states did rescind. Tennessee was the second state to rescind. I think that Nebraska might have been the first. But see, once again, that never got to court. It never got to federal court because they weren't going to take it to federal court until they had 36 votes, counting the ones that had rescinded it. And I bet, Duke, you have got one of these little devices in your palm too, and you can Google. Dr. Google will tell you how many states rescinded the Equal Rights Amendment. But I know that Tennessee was the second. And so they never got up to 36. I think they got to 34. And last year there was talk again of Virginia voting to ratify it, but that vote never took place. And
It did actually.
oh, did it? It got voted down?
No, they did, but then I think it got thrown back into the courts because they had other states that have since rescinded their passage. So
okay, so that it's still up in the air, but the reason I think that the courts would decide against Virginia's vote or anybody else's is because the Equal Rights Amendment had in the amendment language that said if it's not ratified within 6 or 8 years, it's dead. And so then when it wasn't ratified in 6 or 8 years, by this time it's 1970, I guess about 1980, when it hadn't been ratified. So they went back to Congress and got a 2-year extension on ratification. Congress passed that to be added to the amendment, even though the states had not voted for that extension. And so it was set to expire on July 1st, 1982. I actually got to go out to the Reagan Library and write a paper about this because Ronald Reagan was president and he had been elected with the full support of Mrs. Schlafly. And so she was planning at I think the Mayflower Hotel there, very near the White House, a big celebration at midnight on July the 1st, that morning, saying that we've won because the ERA is now officially dead. And so one of the fun things about working in the Reagan Library was that there were all these papers from his staff. He and Nancy Reagan had been invited to this big party, but the women on the staff, such as Elizabeth Dole, were very nervous about him and Nancy going over to this party. And so they were crafting, there were all these drafts of the regrets notice that President Reagan was going to send to Mrs. Schlafly to say, we can't come to the party. And so at midnight, the stroke of midnight, the band struck up tuneful song, Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. And there was a big celebration, but the president was not there for that. But Phyllis Schlafly was an excellent political organizer. She really could take the temperature of the country and see where people were.
So Carole, have you seen the show Mrs. America?
I have seen the show Mrs. America. I actually subscribed to Hulu just to watch it because Marjorie Spruill did some, I don't know, she's a suffrage historian who's now retired from the University of South Carolina, but Marjorie did some podcasts about it and what was fiction and what was not. And Betty Friedan just hated it. She thought it was silly. She did not think it was a very good drama. But factually, most of it was dramatized for the effect. But she really did. Phyllis Schlafly did put her heart and soul into supporting Reagan and getting the vote out for him. And it is believed that she was expecting to have a high-level federal job appointment from President Reagan, which she did not get. But I think all of that business about Bella Abzug and Betty Friedan and Shirley Chisholm, all of that, I think that was pretty accurate. How distressed those women got. So I think it was objective, as objective as anything like that's going to be. It's not 100% historical. It's not a documentary. It was written and produced for entertainment.
All right. Do we have any other questions? And I will have to say also, I watched it. I loved it. And didn't know that much about Phyllis Schlafly before I watched it, and I was fascinated by everything that show kind of got into.
Well, and that one woman was totally fictional, and the woman with the rifle, the woman that she got to support her, the woman with, I just see her as the woman with the gun, but that younger woman whose husband wasn't treating her very well, that was a fictional character. The woman with the woman who was the country woman with the rifle, who seemed the antithesis of Phyllis Schlafly, they were got to be partners in all of this. So that part was, I thought, quite humorous.
Well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Bucy, for your time and your presentation tonight. I know a couple people had commented how much they appreciated it, because we often do, again, stop telling the story with the ratification of the 19th Amendment and don't really kind of take it that step further to get into kind of what happens afterwards. So as we get ready here to wrap up, and let me pull up real quick, just a couple things for you guys. So if you would, we'll drop this link in the chat here in just a moment. If you will fill out the survey for tonight, it will just kind of help us kind of get a sense of your thoughts for this evening's program. And then also, if you are interested in getting professional development credit for your time tonight, we will generate certificates based on those who complete this short survey. And again, I'll drop that link in the chat. If you're watching this recording later on, we will again continue to check this. So if you want to fill that out, we will get that to you. Probably we'll check it about once over a week or so. And then if you are interested, if you've not had a chance to attend one of the annual conferences for Tennessee Council for History Education, we are planning to go back to having an in-person conference next year. That is going to be on Wednesday, September 28th. At the Scarrett Bennett Center in Nashville. So again, go ahead and mark your calendars for that, and we'll be sending out information for that. Usually we start to kind of announce, the call for proposals and that kind of thing in the summer. So be looking for that. You can always check out our website, just kind of Google Tennessee Council for History Education to find out more information. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time tonight. We really do appreciate it, and hope to see you at the conference next year.
Night.